Good evening, I'm Judy Woodruff. On the NewsHour tonight, Election Day in Alabama. Voters head to the polls to decide a Senate race marked by controversy. Then beyond Jerusalem, what President Trump's decision to recognize the contested city as Israel's capital means for the entire region. And as we near the somber anniversary of the Newtown shooting, how those affected by the tragedy are helping other schools prevent similar attacks.
When Sandy Hook came, they gave us the power to say, wait a minute, but we can stop this. Why are we going to sit back and say, well, we'll react when it happens?
All that and more on tonight's PBS NewsHour. All eyes are on Alabama today as voters in the southern state choose their next U.S. senator in a special election. It was originally expected to be a little-noticed race with no real competition. But as John Yang reports, due to state politics and sexual misconduct claims, the contest between Republican Roy Moore and Democrat Doug Jones has come down to the wire.
Embattled Republican Senate candidate Roy Moore saddled up today, going on horseback to vote at the fire station in Gallant, Alabama. Asked if he had a message for the multiple women who've accused him of sexual misconduct when they were teenagers, Moore replied, "Tell the truth." He also had a message for Alabamians.
Well, I think they ought to go out and vote their conscience, and we have a tremendous turnout. The nation is watching this.
If Moore wins, Republican senators have promised he'll face an ethics investigation.
We'll take those problems up when we get to the Senate, when we win.
His opponent, Democrat Doug Jones, cast his ballot in a Birmingham suburb.
This is an important time in Alabama's history, and we feel very confident of where we are and how this is going to turn out. But more importantly, we feel so good about what we've done and what we've said to the people of Alabama and to people of the United States.
Jones hoped to win the votes of Republicans who've drawn the line at the accusations against Moore.
I am being loyal at its most courageous by saying I hold my party to higher standards than Roy Moore.
Some Moore supporters say they doubt his accusers.
These are allegations, and in America, I believe it still holds true that everyone is innocent until proven guilty.
Moore's campaign remained controversial to the very end, his closing rally in Midland City. Former White House advisor Steve Bannon railed against Republicans who've distanced themselves from Moore.
There's a special place in hell for Republicans who should know better.
That seemed aimed at Ivanka Trump, who had said there was a special place in hell for people who prey on children. Moore's wife tried to put down accusations of anti-Semitism.
Fake news would tell you that we don't care for Jews. I tell you all this because I've seen it all, so I just want to set the record straight while they're here. One of our attorneys is a Jew.
The candidate himself made a final pitch.
If you don't believe in my character, don't vote for me.
At his own closing rally last night, Democrat Jones called on voters to choose the right path.
And I think we're going to see it tomorrow, that the majority of the people of Alabama say that it is time that we put our decency, our state, before political party.
In recent days, some Alabamians answered their phones to hear the voice of President Trump.
Roy Moore is the guy we need to pass our Make America Great Again agenda.
Others heard a robocall from President Barack Obama backing Jones. His message? This one's serious. You can't sit it out. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm John Yang.
And now to two people who've been on the ground today talking to Alabamians about this contest. Don Daly is news director at Alabama Public Television. He's covered the state for 3 decades. And the NewsHour's own Daniel Bush, who's been reporting in Birmingham and some smaller cities that are farther to the north. It's good to see both of you. Don Daly, I'm going to start with you. You have been talking to voters today, did different polling places. What are you seeing?
I'm seeing a lot of enthusiasm. I think what was most noticeable to me today at the polling places that I visited was the turnout was noticeably larger than it has been in both the primary and the runoff elections. Both of those saw turnout below 20%. We've seen a lot of action at polls today. We've actually seen lines, and that's something we didn't see in the Republican runoff election nor in the primaries. The Secretary of State here is still sticking with his projection that we'll see up to 25%. That would obviously be a significant improvement, but still rather low considering all that's perceived to be at stake in this election.
And Dan Bush, you were out, as we said, also talking to voters around the state, specifically looking for Republicans who had supported President Trump. What were you hearing from them?
That's right, Judy. So I spoke to a mix of Republicans farther north, outside of Birmingham, areas where Donald Trump won in 2016 by upwards of 75 or more %. And now some had mixed feelings about the allegations against Roy Moore. Some said they believed them, some said they weren't sure. But most of the people I spoke with said that ultimately they can't bring themselves to vote for a Democrat. They said that for them, their priorities are social issues, abortion, same-sex marriage, and other issues. And ultimately, that far outweighed the allegations against Roy Moore.
Don Daly, how does that square with what you've been hearing from voters, especially today as they were having to make a decision?
I spoke with pretty much a cross-section of voters today, and they were pretty entrenched. On one side, the Roy Moore supporters deeply behind him on some of the very issues that Dan mentioned there. Doug Jones supporters, by and large, saying they're embarrassed by the allegations against Roy Moore, and they'd like to send someone to Washington who they feel like wouldn't embarrass them, which has also been something that Doug Jones has been playing up a lot in his campaign ads here in Alabama. In the run-up to the election, he has said emphatically, "I won't embarrass you, Alabama."
And Don, are you sensing that people have made up their minds mostly in the last few days? Have they had their minds made up earlier? What did you see there?
Some people we talked to as late as yesterday were telling us that they were still on the fence on this issue. There were enough Republicans who were rattled by the allegations who told us yesterday that they were going to have to make a last-minute decision when they went into the voting booth. But there were just as many who said they had their minds made up. There were some who have told us that they had their minds made up about Roy Moore even before these sexual misconduct allegations arose, given the past controversies that have followed him.
Dan, I think both of you, part of the story of the last few weeks has been the reaction of women voters in Alabama, Republican women in particular. What did you take away from talking to them?
You know, it's interesting, Judy, because there wasn't a very big difference between women Republicans and men. The women that I spoke to basically all said that although they didn't condone Roy Moore's behavior, whether they believed it or not, they still ultimately felt that they had to vote for a Republican. And it's notable, this election is really showing how deep partisanship runs, and in a race with a pretty stark choice. Female voters, who said that they would be upset if those allegations were true, still end up voting for Roy Moore on the issues alone.
All right, well, we are going to be talking to both of you as the night goes on. And tomorrow, Dan Bush with the NewsHour, Don Daly with Alabama Public Television. Thank you both.
Thank you, Judy.
In the day's other news, thousands of firefighters in Southern California are racing against the clock to prevent a massive wildfire from spreading into nearby neighborhoods. The Thomas Fire has burned more than 234,000 acres in just over a week, but it's still only 20% contained. William Brangham has our report.
With flames hundreds of feet high, the Thomas Fire burned across coastal ridges near Santa Barbara. It's the 9th straight day this fire has burned in California. Overnight in the foothills, residents watched the blaze in awe and horror.
We have a great view every day here of what's going on, and it's creeping up, it's creeping up, it's creeping up, and today is the scariest day so far.
Now the 5th largest fire in the state's history, the Thomas Fire expanded northwest from Ventura County to Santa Barbara. The fire continues to march deeper inside Los Padres National Forest and up the coastline. On those hard-to-reach ridges, crews started their own controlled fires, burning dry grass in the hope that the larger blaze won't then be able to spread to the homes below.
What the purpose of this is to burn off this whole bowl of vegetation and create a huge buffer between the east end of Santa Monica Canyon and the west end of Santa Monica Canyon.
The challenge lies in finding safe footing on the deep canyon walls for firefighters to take a stand. Below, ash-covered plants looked like a fresh snowfall, while smoke suffocated neighborhoods.
Mandatory evacuations.
Tens of thousands of people remain evacuated across the affected counties. Officials say the blaze has destroyed more than 680 homes, including Arthur Hertz's, whose house and everything around it burned to the ground.
It's charred tree trunks. There's no vegetation. It's just dirt. It's like sand. It's like completely gone.
The roaring blaze shows no signs of slowing, as warnings about the unpredictable Santa Ana winds and continued lack of moisture extend through the week. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm William Brangham.
California officials estimate that it has cost more than $48 million so far to fight the massive Thomas Fire. Federal terrorism charges were filed today against the suspect in yesterday's failed New York City subway bombing. Prosecutors said that Aqaid Ullah, an immigrant from Bangladesh, wanted to set off a homemade bomb during the morning rush hour to, quote, maximize destruction. Meanwhile, in Washington, President Trump again called on Congress to overhaul the nation's immigration system in the wake of a pair of terror incidents carried out by immigrants.
There have now been 2 terrorist attacks in New York City in recent weeks carried out by foreign nationals here on green cards. The first attacker came through the visa lottery, and the second through chain migration. We're going to end both of them. The lottery system and chain migration. We're going to end them fast.
Yesterday's blast happened less than 2 months after an immigrant from Uzbekistan plowed his truck into a bike path near the World Trade Center, which led to the deaths of 8 people. President Trump is facing a new wave of calls for a congressional investigation after more than a dozen women accused him of sexual misconduct. Our Lisa Desjardins has more on that and on the growing number of other sexual misconduct allegations that have recently come to light.
From Democrats in Congress who pushed 2 of their own to resign last week, a turn to the president.
Mr. President, you do not live under a different set of rules.
Today, 54 Democratic congresswomen called on the House Oversight Committee to investigate allegations President Trump groped or otherwise sexually harassed women before he took office.
Sexual abuse will not be tolerated, whether it's by a Hollywood producer, the chef of a restaurant, a member of Congress, or the President of the United States. No man or woman is above the law.
Mr. President, what did you mean when you... The president has denied all charges, but New York Senator Kirsten Gillibrand and 5 other senators have said he should resign. In a tweet, the president swung back, writing that Gillibrand previously came to him, quote, begging for campaign contributions, saying she, quote, would do anything for them. That set off a firestorm of reaction from the senator herself.
It was a sexist smear attempting to silence my voice, and I will not be silenced on this issue.
And others on the left, Connecticut Senator Richard Blumenthal.
The president's tweet this morning against Senator Gillibrand was a disgraceful, sexist slur.
White House Press Secretary Sarah Sanders said the president's tweet was in no way sexual.
I think only if your mind is in the gutter would you have read it that way. He's obviously talking about political partisan games that people often play.
Also on the Hill today, a New York Times report detailed the inner workings of Republican Representative Blake Farenthold's office, calling it a hostile work environment rife with sexual innuendo. The Texas congressman used $84,000 of taxpayer money to settle a sexual harassment claim with a former staffer 3 years ago. Allegations of sexual assault also hit the sports world today. The NFL Network suspended 3 of its analysts after a former stylist, Jamie Cantor, accused them of inappropriate touching and showing her their genitals. Cantor claimed 4 additional employees also sexually harassed her. And a CBS News report chronicled recent sexual assault and harassment of female cadets at the U.S. Air Force Academy, something the Pentagon says has been on the rise since 2007.
I was sexually assaulted my freshman year, and the sexual harassment I endured
eventually made me leave.
The women interviewed by CBS say the Academy failed to report the attacks or reprimand their attackers. The head of the Academy defended how they handle such cases, but also said,
I'm disgusted by those reports. I mean, just like you.
For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Desjardins.
The chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee is speaking out against two of President Trump's most controversial court nominees. Republican Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa told CNN that he has advised the White House to reconsider the nominations of Jeff Mateer, who was tapped to become a federal judge in Texas, and Brett Talley, who was selected to serve in Alabama. Both have faced scrutiny over controversial remarks they've made in the past. The stock market was mostly mixed today, but two indexes again hit record highs. The Dow Jones Industrial Average surged 118 points to close at 24,504, a new record. The Nasdaq fell more than 12 points, and the S&P 500 rose 4, a record for it as well. And a passing of note, San Francisco's mayor died unexpectedly overnight. Democrat and former civil rights lawyer Ed Lee became the first Asian American to lead the city in 2011. Lee oversaw a technology-driven economic boom and worked to create more affordable housing. He was also a staunch defender of San Francisco's sanctuary city policy toward immigrants. Ed Lee was 65 years old. Still to come on the NewsHour, 5 years after the Sandy Hook shooting, schools identify students who could pose a threat. The global consequences of recognizing Jerusalem as Israel's capital. On the ground with agents enforcing an immigration crackdown. A new book on Nelson Mandela's presidential years, and much more. This Thursday, the Federal Communications Commission, or FCC, is expected to take a vote that could have significant implications for Americans' access to the Internet. The FCC is expected to roll back rules that were imposed to protect what is called net neutrality, regulations passed during the Obama administration. The idea was to ensure that Internet providers, including big companies like Verizon, Comcast, and AT&T, treat all content on the web equally, that they provide a kind of open highway and are not allowed to charge more or even block your ability to see content from other companies like Netflix, Facebook, and Google. The FCC chairman, Ajit Pai, is pushing to kill the Obama-era rules, saying that they actually are not helping consumers. He argues the web needs less regulation. We interviewed Pai when he first released the proposal, and tonight we hear from a Democrat on the commission, Mignon Clyburn, who is opposed to the move. Commissioner Clyburn, thank you for being with us. So what is it about Chairman Pai's move that you object to?
It leaves the consumer in a regulatory-free zone. No one is looking out for their best interests. The question is simple. Do you, as a consumer, control your experiences online? Or will it be that multi-billion-dollar internet service provider? It is very simple.
Well, he has argued, and you know this very well, he says what we've got now, thanks to the Obama administration, are heavy-handed government regulations. He says they've discouraged innovation, that investment in these companies is down as a result of these regulations.
There are no credible studies that show that investment is down. The Internet rules that we have in place today, the open Internet rules that we passed in 2015, they threw away over 700 rules and 25 provisions that we governed ourselves back in the old telecom era. So the rules are light touch, forward-looking, and they take into account that the Internet today is different than it was even 10 years ago. Internet service providers are sometimes in the content business. Some of them own media companies. Right. So the question is, will they have the incentive to advantage, to promote, to give favoritism to their own content, or will there be an even playing field? And that's the question, and that is at risk.
Again, I know you're familiar with Mr. Pai's pushback. He's saying, well, what we've had is heavy regulation, and what we need to go back to is, in his words, light touch regulatory environment like what we had from the late 90s through 2015 when the Obama administration imposed these new rules.
Well, my answer is this. These rules that we have today were built on an era that started back in 2005 when there were internet principles put in place because there were issues. And the FCC back in 2005 said, we need an agreement. Internet service providers, you need to treat applications and services and access over the internet equal. They said that. But the voluntary approach that they created back then, because of the number of complaints that we had, it was obvious it did not work. We needed to codify or put those rules on paper in place. And that's what we have today. And the internet has thrived. And our individual experiences, they have just ballooned because of the certainty that we have, that we know protections are in place, that no one can favor or block traffic when it comes to my experiences over the internet. But that is at risk coming Thursday.
Commissioner Clyburn, you've been openly saying that you're concerned about what this could mean for communities of color. What are you referring to there?
We would have never heard about Ferguson, Missouri, but for the internet. People on the ground were telling the stories. And then and only then did the rest of the media ecosystem weigh in and cover it. So you've got communities that no one else is listening to. They're telling their own story. They're promoting their own products. Their services are now a part of the lexicon of the American experience. But if we go back to the days where there are no protections, where an internet service provider can suppress your experience, can favor someone else's traffic, cannot tell your story, then so many communities of color, poor rural communities, we would not hear about them. They would, in essence, not be on the media map. And that would be a shame if we go back to the days where you had gatekeepers.
So specifically, what are you worried that, say, a Verizon or a Comcast could do?
I worry that if there is MignonClyburn.com, and Verizon has a competing business with MignonClyburn.com, then they would favor that experience or the traffic that would promote their company or their business interests, and mine would be at risk. So it is about an even playing field. It is about small startups being able to compete if they have a superior product.
So just yesterday, in an apparent attempt to address some of these criticisms, Chairman Pai came up with a proposal. He said there's been this agreement between the FCC and the Federal Trade Commission, whereby once this takes effect, the FTC is going to be given the responsibility of going after these internet providers if they engage in unfair practices.
The FTC is an agency that has absolutely no experience when it comes to net neutrality protections. The FTC is an agency that does not play in this space when it comes to utility or telecommunications providers. These are the same providers that give us internet access. And if you don't have any experience, or if you don't have the authority, which the FTC does not, I believe, then who is there to protect you? And so that memorandum of understanding, that agreement, was an afterthought.
Finally, this vote is expected to happen on Thursday. It's expected the chairman's going to prevail. He's got the majority. But once that happens, there are going to be court challenges. Do you expect this is going to go on for some time?
I do, which will create uncertainty in the market. We have a system that is the envy of every other country in the world. Why break it? Why cause disruption? Why?
FCC Commissioner Mignon Clyburn, thank you very much.
My pleasure.
This week marks a somber anniversary, the mass shooting at an elementary school in Newtown, Connecticut. In the 5 years since, many of the parents who lost their children that day have been pushing to reduce gun violence. One group, Sandy Hook Promise, has taken that effort right into the schools. Special correspondent Lisa Stark of our partner, Education Week, traveled to Miami to visit the first school district to implement the program. It's part of our weekly segment, Making the Grade.
Miami's John Ferguson High School spills over with more than 4,000 students, the largest school in the district.
There is a lot of isolation around,
especially in a school this big,
because it's very hard for some students to fit in.
These students are working to change that.
We just want to make sure that everybody knows that they're not alone.
Their motivation? A tragedy that happened 5 years ago and nearly 1,400 miles away.
A very chaotic scene is the best way to put it right now.
The horrific shooting at Sandy Hook Elementary in Newtown, Connecticut. 20 children, 6 and 7-year-olds, and 6 educators gunned down by a troubled 20-year-old.
No one should ever lose a child in these sort of circumstances, especially when it's preventable.
Nicole Hockley's 6-year-old son, Dylan, died in his first grade classroom, her grief magnified by what she found out afterwards.
I had always assumed that our shooter had snapped, and it was a moment of clarity, furious clarity for me, to find out that he had exhibited signs and signals throughout his life, and that this was a very typical mass shooting.
Hockley's mission now?
We want to prevent other tragedies from happening by teaching people to know the signs of violence.
She and other Newtown parents started Sandy Hook Promise and enlist students in their fight. We promise! Their free training has been used in 4,000 schools and youth organizations. It includes Start with Hello, an activity which encourages students to interact. And a program called Say Something, teaching students to tell an adult if they see signs someone may be a threat to themselves or others.
This isn't about snitching or being a tattletale. This isn't about getting someone in trouble. This is about getting them help.
The nation's 4th largest school district, Miami-Dade, has signed on. Sandy Hook Promise trainers have visited more than 100 schools here.
A lot of atrocities in schools, school shootings and such, stem from students who were either bullied or isolated. And so by dealing with this problem, we're hoping that we can minimize anything coming up in the future.
Dewey Cornell, who has analyzed school violence for decades, says that is precisely the point.
You don't prevent a forest fire by waiting until the trees are all ablaze. You pay attention to all the campfires. You make sure all the campfires are taken care of. And we have incidents of bullying all the time in our schools. And the more that we can do to deal with these minor conflicts before they escalate into more serious ones, the better off we'll be.
Reducing violence in schools isn't just about reaching students. Experts who've studied the issue say it's also important that teachers and administrators react sensibly to any safety concerns.
Is a student posing a threat? All right, is the student on a path toward an attack?
A team from every school in Miami-Dade is learning how to identify, evaluate, and handle possible threats. They're taught to take threats seriously, but not to overreact.
We had a child who chewed his Pop-Tart into the shape of a gun and was suspended from school. After the Sandy Hook shooting, a first grader in Maryland went pow-pow with his finger and was suspended from school. These are fearful overreactions that send a really negative message throughout the school. This girl doodled on her desk.
Cornell, who developed this threat assessment training after the Columbine school shooting in 1999, believes districts that use zero-tolerance policies make their schools less safe, students less likely to report concerns.
If a threat is vague or if somebody is clearly angry, you want to err on the side of caution.
This training includes exercises. What should a school do if a student threatens to beat up another? And what if a teen has a hit list?
Seriously, because I see an escalation.
The goal, not to automatically expel the student, but to address the underlying problem.
What I'm taking away today is that not everything can be solved with a suspension. It takes really bringing those students together, letting the victim feel heard, letting the one who, did the bullying understand what he did or she did. It's really changing our mindset.
Advocates say this can be more effective than turning schools into fortresses because most school shootings are carried out not by an outsider, but by a student.
We've done a series of controlled studies over the past 15 years showing that when schools use our model, their suspension rates go down, their bullying goes down, and the threats aren't carried out.
The Sandy Hook training isn't one and done. Schools pledge to keep awareness high. At Ferguson, the Psychology Honor Society sponsors numerous events. You've heard of speed dating? The students here have a new version, speed friending.
We got people from different grades and we put them all in the gymnasium, and each of them had 2-minute conversations, and then you can see that people were laughing, people that had never met each other, people having full-on conversations.
An effort they believe has paid off.
In one of the speed friendings, there was a student that was having a problem and he opened up to it. So we brought the attention to one of his teachers, and that really helped him to cope with his problems and talk about them more.
Other activities include encouraging students to join someone eating alone and to pass positive notes to friends and strangers.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, good morning.
Ferguson High School psychology teacher Michelle Vagoa Suarez heads up the ongoing activities inspired by Sandy Hook Promise.
Before they came, I didn't really value what I could do. It was kind of like, I thought of it as, well, it's a society problem and let's just pray. But when Sandy Hook came, they gave us the power to say, wait a minute, but we can stop this. Why are we going to sit back and say, well, we'll react when it happens?
It's hard to measure how much of a difference all this really makes. Sharon Kranz oversees the effort in the Miami-Dade schools.
This is prevention, so you don't really know what you prevented, but I know that we're making it okay to speak up. We're making it okay to include people.
There have been times that we've reached out to different communities and families.
Nicole Hockley points to anecdotal reports indicating their Say Something training has stopped suicides and possible shootings. In California, students reported a classmate's threatening online post. In Ohio, students overheard shooting threats and alerted school officials.
And how does that make you feel?
Sometimes it takes me out at the knees, if I'm honest with you, because it's incredibly elating to know that we've just been able to help someone else, but it's never going to be enough.
Hockley says it only encourages her to take her message to more schools, to redouble her efforts. For Education Week and the PBS NewsHour, I'm Lisa Stark in Miami, Florida.
Last week, President Trump declared Jerusalem the capital of Israel and promised to move the U.S. Embassy, currently in Tel Aviv, to the Holy City. The announcement overturned decades of U.S. policy, but it was met with less outrage than many feared. Now, how the decision may echo in the region and beyond, and a special correspondent, Nick Schifrin.
Judy, the president's announcement was dramatic, but the immediate response has been relatively muted. That doesn't mean, though, there aren't longer-term strategic consequences. To consider that, I'm joined here in the studio by Paul Salem. He's the Senior Vice President for Policy Analysis, Research, and Programs at the Middle East Institute, and Ryan Crocker, who served as ambassador to 6 countries across the Middle East and South Asia. He joins us from Princeton's Woodrow Wilson School, where he is diplomat in residence. Paul, it seems that there are a couple of reasons that we haven't seen more violence. One of them, perhaps all politics are local in this region as well. And also, maybe it's not a surprise that the U.S. supports Israel, right?
Yeah, I mean, first of all, it wouldn't be correct to measure the long-term impact by the amount of protests and violence. In the Palestinian communities, both in Gaza and the West Bank, Palestinians are exhausted. They've been dispirited for a long time. They had very little hopes that there actually was a peace process. This was very aggravating for them, but doesn't come as a big surprise. And many of them don't think having another violent intifada will get them any further. In the Arab world, there's a lot of sympathy for the Palestinian cause, and this issue of Jerusalem has sparked a lot of emotions and some protest. but most Arabs are also mired in their own domestic problems, their domestic politics. The big uprisings of 2011 were really about domestic issues. So people care, but they don't want to ruin their own country or have a revolution because of it. And the final part, which is Iran and its allies, Hezbollah and so on, who've been organizing protests, also don't want them to get out of hand or turn violent because they're pretty happy with the way things are.
So, Ambassador Crocker, perhaps not only a little Palestinian fatigue, but also perhaps regional fatigue?
These things can take a long time to manifest themselves, so I would not immediately rush to the conclusion that, this issue is no longer significant, there wasn't any violence. I think that significance may only come clear in the months ahead.
No, and actually quite the opposite. I think what we're talking about is those longer-term strategic influences or impacts. So, Paul Salem, one of them seems to be on the peace process, but it's not just the peace process, the impact. It's about impacts for the larger region, isn't it?
Right. I mean, the impact on the peace process really wasn't going anywhere, most probably. But this really maybe puts an end to even the semblance of having a peace process. It also, in the Palestinian context, weakens President Abbas, who would have been any partner even for stabilization, and strengthens Hamas, who has now called for a third intifada. In the wider Middle East, it undermines and weakens America's partners, Egypt, Saudi Arabia, UAE, Bahrain, and others who have worked with the U.S. on issues relating to Iran, but also were hopeful that there would be a peace plan, they could be part of it, weakens and undermines them. The ones perhaps who are happiest, other than the Israeli government itself, which certainly is very happy, are Iran and its allies and Russia's President Putin. We saw President Putin immediately take a victory lap, visiting Syria, Egypt, and Turkey all in one day, denouncing the Jerusalem decision while also declaring victory in Syria and other places. And it's been a great gift to Iran and Hezbollah, who've wanted to change the narrative from the carnage of Syria, which they've been embroiled in, to reviving the issue of Jerusalem, which is a very evocative issue, and pose as the champions of Jerusalem. So they're in the middle of a rebranding, and this couldn't have come at a better time for them.
So, Ambassador Crocker, is that right? Does this help Russia? Does this help Iran? Does this make it a little more difficult for the Sunni Arab states in the region, who President Trump has wanted to ally with him in the future?
I'm not sure it will have that much impact. Jordan and Egypt, the two Arab states with peace agreements with Israel, have survived worse shocks than this. I would watch Saudi Arabia, though. I do not expect to see significant criticism coming out of the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, again, for the reasons Paul was talking about. They have other more immediate issues that concern them, like where the kingdom is going in general, Yemen, Iran. These are the issues that are occupying the bandwidth, not Jerusalem.
And I think it's important to also broaden out the discussion and ask whether the impact will actually be felt beyond the region. On Friday, the United Nations Security Council held an extraordinary session in which they actually called an emergency session, thanks to something the United States has done. And let's listen now to Matthew Rycroft. He's the British permanent representative to the UN, criticizing President Trump in the United States.
We disagree with the US decision to recognize Jerusalem as the capital of Israel and to begin preparation to move the American embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It is not in line with Security Council resolutions and is unhelpful in terms of prospects for peace in the region.
So, Paul Salem, is one of the long-term impacts actually less on the region and more the U.S. relationship with the rest of the world?
I do think so, and I think it's in line with a set of policy decisions that President Trump has taken to kind of dismantle American global leadership, whether by design or by instinct, on issues of climate change, the Pacific Trade Agreement. And this decision, violates decades of U.S. policy, violates UN Security Council resolutions, violates international law in the sense that he's recognizing, at least in East Jerusalem, territory that was occupied by force in 1967, and doing it in a way that clearly flaunts any idea of consultation beforehand or working with allies. It seems to be part of how President Trump and some of his advisors seem to view America's role in the world.
Ambassador Crocker, is that how you see it? Lack of U.S. leadership and other countries stepping into a vacuum?
Well, clearly the U.S. has been backing away from its traditional leadership roles. I'd have to point out, though, it didn't start with President Trump. It started with President Obama. So we've kind of, and we saw that most clearly, I think, with the refugee crisis, where we just were not a player. Yeah, the backing away is it's real, and it's potentially quite significant. And I'm sure that the French and the British will try to step into this. But there's another bigger question there. Can they do it? And I would have to suggest that neither Britain nor France nor the two together can be an adequate substitute for the role. There are voices now coming out of the region saying, okay, we get it. No more two-state, two-capital solutions. It'll be one state, one capital, with guaranteed equal rights for all of its people. But I think you may see some fairly dramatic things said in the months ahead.
Ambassador Ryan Crocker joining us from Princeton University, and Paul Salem from the Middle East Institute. Thank you very much to you both.
Thank you, Nick.
Thank you.
Earlier this year, President Trump signed an executive order giving immigration and customs enforcement officers greater flexibility in arresting undocumented immigrants. The order also ended the Obama-era policy of prioritizing violent criminals and gang members for deportation. Last week, the agency credited those changes with a sharp drop in apprehensions at the U.S.-Mexico border and a surge in arrests of undocumented immigrants already living in the United States. As PJ Tobia reports, critics say those arrests are creating fear in immigrant communities, but agents say they are simply enforcing the law.
We got 3 targets today. We're going to start in order, A, B, and C.
Just before 5 a.m., a dozen immigration and customs enforcement agents gather in a strip mall parking lot, reviewing their targets for the day.
Surveillance shows that an individual fitting his description leaves at 5.
These men and women enforce President Trump's promise to crack down on illegal immigration. ICE asks that their officers' faces be obscured for security reasons. The agents roll out. Their unmarked SUVs turn into a Virginia neighborhood.
This might be this house here.
We will identify all the individuals in the house and anybody that's in there that's of interest to us, either criminal history, is in the country illegally, public safety threat. We will make those arrests.
Agents are staking out the home of a Bolivian man with 2 DUIs and 2 misdemeanors. They're eventually let into the house. The man they're looking for isn't there, but one arrest is made. While investigating the whereabouts of their target, ICE agents discover a different undocumented man. Collateral arrests like this one have become more common under President Trump. Under Obama, this man may not have been arrested at all, to the frustration of some agents. Matthew Monroe is an assistant field director for Immigration and Customs Enforcement. He's worked on immigration enforcement for more than 2 decades.
The target wasn't here at this point, but there were a number of other individuals in the house that we conducted consensual interviews with, and one of them was identified as an individual who is in the country illegally.
At the processing center, the man undergoes questioning. They discover he's a Nicaraguan national who entered the U.S. illegally in 1988. Since President Trump took office, immigration arrests are up 42%. ICE estimates nationwide they make 400 arrests a day. ICE has arrested 37,000 undocumented immigrants without criminal records. That's a 145% increase over fiscal year 2016.
There have been times in the past that policies have been such that we have been focused on just certain classes of illegal aliens or people in the country who are subject to removal. Nowadays, it is anybody who's in the country illegally is subject to arrest.
How is this a different environment than at any other time in your career?
We are enforcing the laws that we are sworn to uphold, and that's what we're doing nowadays.
Anyone in ICE custody will eventually find themselves in an immigration detention center like this one outside of Farmville, Virginia. Every day, ICE holds between 30 and 40,000 immigrants in custody. Next year, the White House is aiming to increase that number by 20%. Once they arrive at the detention center, they're separated based on factors like immigration and criminal history. Detainees can meet with a deportation officer to answer questions. Often, they'll act as translators for one another. But the one question they won't get answered is when they might be deported. The agency says that information is a security risk. Macario Diaz Morales was held in the Farmville Detention Center for a month and a half. He was released on bond in early November. We met his wife, Arely Vega Reyna, a few days later at their lawyer's office, the Legal Aid Justice Center. Immigration raids in their community made the family too scared to speak to NewsHour in their neighborhood. Our cameras might draw unwanted attention. Arely says she was getting in her car to leave for work one morning when an ICE agent approached her in the driveway, asking for her husband.
I'd like to speak with him. Okay, I told him he's asleep. And I left, opened the door, and went inside. I closed the door, but didn't close it well. It was a bit open. After I called him, I went back, and they were already inside.
Macario illegally crossed the border into the U.S. from Mexico in 2006. That same year, he met Arely. She had also come from Mexico, but had been in the U.S. since 1996. They have 5 children, 3 from her previous marriage. Before he was detained by ICE, Macario supported the family. Arely now works construction to make ends meet. She says that first night after ICE detained her husband was the hardest.
It was the first night in 12 years. I had never been apart from him, nor had he been apart from the kids. It wasn't easy because I had to work and help them move forward, pay for what needed to be paid. And when he spoke to me, he told me not to let him go, not to let him die alone. It's hard.
According to ICE, Macario was picked up as part of a targeted enforcement operation, like the one we rode along with. A misdemeanor arrest in July flagged him for deportation.
They have the potential to be arrested and removed from the United States. That is the fact, that's the laws that are on the books, it's the mission that we've been charged with enforcing. From the President to the Secretary to the Director of Homeland ICE, this is what we're going to do.
As for Macario and his family, he's waiting for approval to join a non-immigrant U visa his wife has. Arely is waiting to hear back on her own green card application.
I understand that the country has its rules, has its laws, and maybe we've broken that law of coming illegally. One comes for work because of necessity to move the family forward. And I hope he doesn't go back to Mexico and that he stays with the family.
What happens next depends, in part, on what the court decides. They'll find out if Macario can stay lawfully in the United States or if he'll be deported back to Mexico. A life-changing decision, out of their hands, made by a system that's playing by new rules. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm PJ Tobia in Washington.
Now, a possible turning point in South Africa. Its ruling party, the African National Congress, is expected to replace its leader, Jacob Zuma, this weekend. Whoever is chosen could also replace Zuma as the country's president in the 2019 general election. But as Zuma and his party have been marred by accusations of corruption, some South Africans are re-evaluating the legacy of the party's most famous member, Nelson Mandela. With the recent release of a book on the life and words of Mandela, Jeffrey Brown has a special edition of the NewsHour bookshelf from Johannesburg, South Africa.
4 years after his death, Nelson Mandela remains the larger-than-life symbol of historic change in South Africa. The man who led a liberation movement against the white apartheid regime from prison before being released in 1990. Now comes a new look at the political struggle that followed and Mandela's 5 years as president of a newly democratic nation.
I took on the project because I believed in the man, number one, and I respected him. But much more importantly, I felt that his words needed to be heard far and wide.
Mandla Langa, best known in South Africa as a novelist, worked from drafts Mandela himself wrote toward a never-finished memoir of his presidential years. The result is Dare Not Linger, partly Mandela's words, partly Langa's, presented as a sequel to Mandela's 1995 memoir, Long Walk to Freedom, which sold some 14 million copies worldwide. For Mandla Langa, this was personal. An activist in the anti-apartheid struggle, he was arrested in 1976 and spent years in exile.
Those years were rough, and those years were also full of despair. Mandela was the person that we looked to even when we were in the camps in Angola, when we were in the most horrific places. This was one name that kept us, that made us to keep the faith.
So when you took on this project, was it frightening or daunting?
I had a dream, and in the dream, it was as if Mandela was telling me that I must not write nonsense. I must write his words, as it were, in the most correct form.
So he's admonishing you.
He was admonishing me.
Get it, do it right.
Better do it right. Get it right, yeah.
The promotion of the spirit of reconciliation and nation building is something that we should all unite and try and achieve in our country.
Mandela faced infighting among black African factions and continued resistance from some white Afrikaners used to wielding power. He spoke to the NewsHour's Charlene Hunter-Gault in 1994 on the eve of his election to the presidency.
The problem that we face today is that we are dealing with a group of men and women who are produced by apartheid, who can talk about democracy in a way different from what you and I understand by democracy. We also had another tendency from the liberation movement of people who want to continue resisting, even at a time when we are preparing to govern. We have to reconcile those two tendencies.
The new book captures Mandela addressing internal problems while regularly meeting other leaders on the world stage. Mandla Langa came to see Mandela, the political leader, as a strong, forceful presence.
There has been now and then that kind of imputation that he was just a figurehead. He was very, very hands-on at the very beginning. He was alive to the fact that he needed to exert his own authority on the situation. When he dealt with the Afrikaner generals, he knew that this was a gamble because on the one hand, there was this crisis of expectation from the black people that he has come out, he has got to lead us, and he must not sell us out.
And everything's going to get better quickly.
Quickly, yes.
Years later, it's clear that while things got better for many, an economic apartheid persists for millions of blacks. And South Africa is regularly cited as one of the world's most unequal nations. The new book comes out amid a renewed debate over the nation's progress since its turn to democracy. Some we spoke to question whether Mandela's commitment to reconciliation came at too great a cost, and they see an unfulfilled legacy.
I think a lot was given away, and I think too much was given away.
Wits University lecturer Mpho Matsipa.
Many South Africans, including myself, imagine that the future would be one that is more just, where there isn't so much inequality, where inequality doesn't continue to be so racialized and gendered. And so I think that current material realities are in themselves a testament to, or they are a challenge to that legacy.
But another view sees enormous progress against all odds, and the Mandela legacy fully intact.
Get rid of apartheid, the laws.
Albie Sachs, a leading figure in the anti-apartheid struggle, helped write the country's new constitution and was appointed by Mandela to serve as a justice on the nation's highest court.
The institutions of democracy are functioning now, and they give the new generation who are impatient with what they see as the slowness, the tardiness of change, who are demanding more rapid transformation, but they've got the weapons and the instruments to do that. I would give 3 cheers, not 1, not 2, 3 cheers, maximum cheers, to Mandela and his generation for fulfilling their life's mission, which was to tear down apartheid and install democracy.
Amid this debate, author Mandla Langa thinks the timing is right for the new book on Mandela's years as president.
We are living in the most confusing time as South Africans, and I believe that we need to look back on where we were, what we were, and how we were. And I think that those moments, that past, which made us the kinds of people we are, a symbol of that past was Nelson Mandela.
With Dare Not Linger, Langa hopes Mandela's words and deeds can continue to guide his country today. For the PBS NewsHour, I'm Jeffrey Brown in South Africa.
Fascinating. And that is the NewsHour for tonight. On Wednesday, science correspondent Miles O'Brien explains the effect climate change has on California's wildfires. I'm Judy Woodruff. Join us online, where we'll have the latest results in the Alabama Senate race, and again here tomorrow evening. For all of us at the PBS NewsHour, thank you, and we'll see you soon.
You're watching PBS.